There's a lost name from the 90s of lonely deaths that shaped musical history, but not in a good way, because we were robbed of what we could have had more of. Michael Hutchence is a voice you know, even if you're not aware of it, and you may not even know that he was in one of the biggest bands in the 90s, and if he had lived, there's no telling how big their music would have continued to grow. He went from working in a factory 12 hours a day writing songs on a piece of paper out of his pocket to being a legendary songwriter of the ages for his own generation. When you hear Michael in interviews, you hear the lovable laughter and charismatic personality he was, and carrying a huge talent with him, his voice. Michael's style and vocals were his own. He became a huge face in the batch of talent from his own era, as INXS was about to break new ground with their new album and huge tour that was set, and Michael being a huge face in the band with his charm and good looks. The three brothers and three friends from Australia that had conquered the music industry for over a decade came to an abrupt stop when they lost Michael. A sad and lonely death would take him. It's one that no one wants to admit how and why it happened. The details are messy, but nonetheless it did take place. This is the death of Michael Hutchence in a lonely hotel room.
The INXS star was found.
Death crossed the globe. Britain was in as much shock as Australia.
Michael Hutchence, lead singer of top Australian band INXS. The 37-year-old
this afternoon, the rock star's body was taken away with a police escort to the morgue at Glebe. Hutchence's body will now undergo an extensive...
was hanging. However, a coroner's investigation is still to determine whether the death...
Michael was 37 years old when he left this world. Fame, money, love, success had all been achieved, and with the 90s taking a wild turn in music, INXS had survived and continued to push on, surviving the roller coaster of it all. When we look into Michael's life at the end of 1997, he was right in the middle of his life, but it was complicated as well. He was a father, lead singer of a huge band that counted on him to be their frontman. He had a solo album that was coming out and caught in a very complicated love triangle. Michael was busier than ever, as INXS had been, in a season of hard work, rebuilding who they were, their music, a tour coming, making new music, and practicing non-stop. To understand the timing and what it was like in the zeitgeist and moment in Michael's death, you have to understand what was happening in that moment to get the full details of how it impacted everyone. Michael was loved by many women. He didn't keep it secret. Flings and girlfriends were a common thing in his scenery. He made no privacy of it throughout the years. It was known that he liked to indulge when it came to love. What many people may not be aware of is that Michael was in a long 10-year affair with a woman named Paula Yates. Paula was someone that was known throughout the 80s and 90s. She was a figure in her moment, being a well-known interviewer on TV shows, a music journalist, many different traits, and at the time was in a very public relationship with Bob Geldof, but that was a story in its own. Bob was also a huge musician in his time. Paula and Bob met in 1976, finally marrying in 1986, and having 3 children as well. Paula would have her own sad story as well. She and Michael would meet in 1985, and it's said that they started their affair that year that lasted for over a decade before they made it official to the public and having a child in 1996 named Tiger Lily. Michael himself was a free spirit and was well known as a man that loved the taste of quick love, living the true elements of a true rock star god, breaking hearts along the way. As Michael stayed in constant connection with Paula, he also had other famous girlfriends for a small moment. The one element that is amazing about the last moments of Michael's life is that it was very well documented, especially the last years, as Michael's life had turned into a huge headline story. And with INXS being in Sydney, Australia, at the last moments of Michael's life, Michael was captured around town as the band was rehearsing, getting ready for upcoming shows. The media was already following Michael around, separately from INXS, because of the constant controversy around Michael's life. With Paula finally divorcing her longtime husband, being in multiple affairs through that time as well with other men, and not building a good rapport to the media herself. Paula also wins the children, taking them from her ex-husband, and to fuel the media's lust of the story, Michael and Bob start having public blows with each other back and forth. In interviews, Michael became a walking gold mine for paparazzi and news outlets. And so it started their public life, Michael and Paula, with Paula's children and her new baby, Tiger Lily, the child of Michael. But that was the open public version of Michael that was seen by all. There was a darker and more personal version that you have to see for elements that will arise after Michael's gone. INXS wasn't the hottest band in the later part of the 90s, and they had simply just become the older guys that were still trying to catch the mainstream of the circuit. They had no new big hits, and their last album to come out in early 1997 and didn't do as well as they had hoped in the US, doing better in other countries, but still coming up short compared to what they had seen in the past. INXS had met this moment of a new look and sound in the music business, surviving most of it through the early 90s, having a big hit, but with bands like Oasis and Blur capturing the European market and soon to be North American market. Rock was leading the way, and INXS was having trouble finding new fans. Michael had been on Prozac for the last 2 years of his life, a secret let out from his sister after his own death, about how his life had turned out later on, from love to his career, and where his future was headed. She said that he was upset. Michael himself had even admitted in an interview, not long, just months before his death, that his life of writing music had changed. It had become harder, saying he wasn't able to concentrate and use tricks that he had used in the past, and inspiration seemed to somewhat be harder to find these days. Michael, along with INXS, was in a rebuilding moment, but it was in the spotlight in front of everyone. But Michael has a secret in his life that only he and one other person knew about. In 1992 in Denmark, Michael, along with his then girlfriend, at the time left for pizza, taking their bicycles. As they were out, they stopped for a moment on the side of the road. A taxi driver comes up behind them, not going around, where the taxi driver soon gets out of his vehicle, walks up to Michael, and hits him in the back of the head, knocking him down to the pavement. Michael's head falls, hits the pavement, cracking it, right on the sidewalk. Michael had blood coming from his nose, his ears, and was unconscious for a moment. Michael's girlfriend, Helena, she said that she thought Michael was dead, limp, unconscious, and bleeding horrifically. The taxi cab driver jumped back in his vehicle and drove off, leaving the two of them helpless. When help arrives for Michael, the cops and medics on the scene simply thought that Michael was just a drunken man and didn't know who he was. They thought that the whole situation was his fault and that he had tripped and fallen on his own accord on the sidewalk. When Michael wakes up in the hospital, he's startled, upset, ripping everything off of him and demanding to be let loose. Somehow this story goes under the radar, really until after Michael's death, until it was released by Michael's ex-girlfriend Helena. She said that Michael was embarrassed about the situation, that it ridiculed him, made him feel less than. People in Michael's circle knew that something had happened, but not to the full extent or the full story in detail. They just knew an accident had happened to Michael. Helena said that when Michael would talk about the story, he would make up his own version, saying that he was in a motorcycle accident in Thailand. But it's this incident that many believe that changed Michael from that day. His personality, his friendships, his future, his songwriting, tender-hearted, insecure, and just wasn't himself after this, many say. Something had changed, and many couldn't pinpoint it at the time because they didn't know of the accident. Michael started to have a hard time handling his fame, but it was just that. Michael's fame would grow apart from INXS. Michael and Helena split in 1995, but it would later be proven that at that moment Michael had received brain damage that would later be found after his death, living with that for 5 years. On September 27, 1997, INXS played their last show at the Star Lake Amphitheater in Pennsylvania. They played 70 shows that year. It was the most they had played in years, promoting their new album, and that was just the first leg of that tour. But in November of 1997, Michael, along with INXS, was back in Sydney, Australia, rehearsing for the second big part of that tour. Michael, along with his band, is staying in the Ritz-Carlton, downtown Sydney. They all have their own rooms, apart from each other. At this moment, Michael is apart from Paula and Tiger Lily, as they had tried making it to Michael in Sydney, but had problems with Paula having the children with her and not able to travel to Sydney with them. Michael had been with his bandmates all week, laughing, just doing what they love to do, make music. Everyone said all week that Michael was in great spirits, laughing, hugging, just completely happy and relaxed. On the 22nd of November, INXS is practicing, and for whatever reason fate had allowed, on that day of the 22nd, someone would be filming the last rehearsal of the band and the last full day of Michael alive. This video is of Michael just hours before he's found dead. We see him happy, laughing, excited, asking questions, taking the time to be there. All we can see is what's right in front of us. As the day ends, Michael goes back to his hotel room at the Ritz. When there, he's visited by two of the last people that will ever see him alive. Michael was visited by two old friends. One of them was Kim Wilson, a well-known actress at the time, and also someone Michael had had an affair with in the past. Kim shows up with another friend named Andrew Raymond. They show up to Michael's room around 11 o'clock that night. They laugh, they drink. Kim says that they're drinking wine, cocktails, just having a nice time. Kim swears that nothing inappropriate ever took place, that it was just a friendly meeting between two old friends. She says that Michael spent most of the time talking about Tiger Lily, how beautiful and special she was, and also how he loved Paula, and talking about the future. Michael had also shared how worried he was about the custody battle going on with Paula and her ex-husband, and how it was going to turn out. Michael was fearful that Paula was going to be hurt. Kim says that she leaves Michael's room after 6 hours, around 5:30 a.m., and Michael seemed happy, excited, exhausted, but thankful that they had come. After Kim and Andrew leave, a phone call would take place with Paula and Michael around 5:30. Paula says that her and Michael would talk, and really just about the same old, that Paula was worried about the kids and the court case coming up. Michael became upset and furious on the phone, and said that he was going to call Bob and beg him to let Paula bring the children to Sydney. Around 5:50 a.m., the next room member says that they can hear yelling in a man's room next to theirs. We find out later Michael had called Bob, yelling at him. At 9:54 a.m. that morning, 2 phone calls were made to Michael's ex-girlfriend, Michelle Bennett, the first one leaving a voicemail, and the second time Michelle picked up. She said that Michael sounded drunk and upset, belligerent. She became worried. Some she could make out of the conversation and some she couldn't. She was so worried that she drove to the hotel, knocking on Michael's door, but with no answer. She went down to the desk and left Michael a note. After the phone call, we lose all contact with the room, and all that is left is the evidence that will be found. That morning, Michael never shows up to practice, and really his bandmates don't think much of it. Michael was often late. They just said they would sit back and wait for him. Michael's manager starts to call him, not getting a response from his room. He knew that Michael was up late that night. At 11:50 a.m. that morning at the Ritz Hotel, the maid would come to Michael's door room. She would knock, to no one answering. She goes to open the door and is met with resistance. As she pushes it, a belt buckle at the top is released, breaking apart. The end of the belt that went down was connected to Michael. Michael was naked and found kneeling with his face down. It doesn't take long before the news breaks out through the hotel, bleeding into the media with phone calls. It happened so fast that the rest of the band that's still at the rehearsal site waiting on Michael finds out while watching TV when breaking news erupts over the channels, telling them that Michael Hutchence has just been found dead. As the coroner arrives, he says that Michael has done this to himself, meaning to harm himself, and it's believed at that moment that it was just that. Family and friends are shocked that Michael is gone. Michael's father drives to the hotel, demanding to see his son. He had just had dinner with Michael the night before, saying that Michael was in great spirits, happy, excited. They laughed, they hugged, they ate food. When an autopsy is done on Michael's body, his blood would come back to show that he had high levels of alcohol, cocaine, and Prozac, as Michael was practicing the next leg of his tour with his bandmates. Now they were to practice carrying Michael's coffin into the church to celebrate his life and mourn the loss of their friend. It's no secret that Michael's death is met with 3 different outcomes from many people that you talk to about it, to how Michael died. Many simply just believe that Michael took his own life and accept that. There's evidence to back it up, even though there is one big flaw that doesn't make sense for Michael's personality, is that he left no note saying his goodbyes or why he did what he did. But too, there are many that don't believe that Michael did harm himself, one of them being Paula. It's also believed that Michael was practicing what is called erotic asphyxiation. Paula saying that she believed this is something that Michael had practiced in the past, and that he had just made a mistake. The third and final story is that Bob had Michael murdered, that he hired a hitman, sent them to Michael's hotel, and had Michael murdered. There is no evidence whatsoever to support this claim, and simply just a wild theory that people say. And as fate would have it, Tiger Lily, the blood child of Michael himself, the child would be raised by the one person Michael wanted out of his life and Tiger Lily's life. Bob would come back into the picture to help raise Tiger Lily, setting aside his anger and years of heartache that he lived with, fighting Paula for his children, but eventually would gain the custody of all the children and raise them all together. In the end, Paula mourns and goes on with her life. Paula herself would have a sad ending to her own life. Stories of missing money from a trust that was meant for Tiger Lily and years of substance abuse that plagued her life. Paula would overdose and die of heroin in 2000 at the age of 41. At the very end of all of it, the sad and intriguing details will always pull people back into the story of Michael that seems stranger than fiction. You have a little girl that never got to meet the man that her father was, that loved her and wanted to see her in every aspect of her life. Michael loved Tiger Lily. He loved being a father. He was just in the beginning of a special chapter in his own life. He just didn't make it to the end of the book. Many people have many different beliefs about what happened to Michael that morning in that hotel room at the Ritz in 1997. We'll never have the full story that makes everyone happy, but we do know that Michael was a special person. We had him for 37 years, leaving a wealth of art for lovers of music. The sad and unnecessary death of Michael Hutchence